Hello and welcome to this tutorial. The point of this tutorial is really just to help people with S-Log2, S-Log3, and it's really just trying to help people that are struggling to understand the color temperature selections that you have, and just to try and explain a few things. So the first thing we need to do is we need to find exposure. So I'm going to do this via the camera's assistance. So I'm going to overexpose this image by 3 stops. Every stop in S-Log is 7%. The target for S-Log3 is 41%. So I want to be 3 stops over that. So I need to add another 21% to this, which, if you understand basic arithmetic, is 62. So to repeat that again, every stop inside of S-Log is 7% of IRE. I've increased my target to 62%. I've given it a very narrow aperture, and now via my iris I'm going to line up my middle grey value, which is here. So to make you understand, this is actually underexposed, so we're just going to open our exposure up, and there we go. This is 3 stops overexposed. It's correctly exposed. So I'm just going to switch off my zebras now, because we don't need it for the rest of this. So I'm going to show you how to color correct with inside of S-Log3. I've already had a bit of a play here, I think, so I'm just going to reset everything to factory default, and I'll explain what we have in the camera. So what we actually have, how we have the camera set up. We have a Tiffin 85 color correction filter, which is made for film. We have a Schneider half-strength Black Frost filter, which it lowers contrast, it makes highlights bloom, etc., etc. In fact, if I switch back to log at the moment, you'll see how the left-hand side of the chart is practically glowing. It's just a personal preference. I quite like shooting with it. The camera is outputting UHD. It's going into an Odyssey 7Q+, which is downscaling, hardware downscaling the image to HD, which just increases MTF. It's just the way I like shooting at the moment. I don't have the 4K RAW output yet. I will in the future, although I do own the 4K RAW, the RAW bundle for the Odyssey 7Q. Thank you, Mitch. Appreciate the sale you recently had. So anyway, how do you color correct within the camera? And why would you color correct within the camera? You color correct within the camera because it increases the, especially the internal recording. It increases the amount of data you're giving over to your finished result. So instead of taking that image into post and then manipulating the burnt-in pixels, you get a chance to shift them now so that they're recorded correctly, and then you've got even less color correction to do in post. So here we are. Just going to have a quick overview of what you can do. Right, black level is pedestal. That doesn't affect S-Log at all, because technically you'd be messing with the gamma curve, and you can only do that with 2 functions in S-Log. The black gamma, which is essentially the toe of your curve. So if you think of curves, it's the toe of the curve. You can select 3 points on that toe. So you can select a low point on the curve, a medium point, a middle point, sorry, and a high point. And essentially, so if you think of your curve, you're placing a dot on that curve. So let's just say we'll go for middle, and then you are pushing up or pulling down that curve. So if you push it up, you're technically raising the black slightly, and if you pull it down, you're technically crushing the black slightly. You might be able to use this to help reduce noise in your image, to match to a different camera. It could be just a creative approach, but do be wary of how it's affecting the image. I'm definitely a person who shoots charts and works with inside the sort of technical approach. So I do shoot people when I shoot tests, but color charts are where I start, if I'm honest. And it's a very good way of finding out how the camera works and dialing the camera in to taste. I would always dial the camera in based on 3200 Kelvin and 5500 Kelvin. So basically a tungsten and a daylight. For me it'd be no different than how you approach film. That sounds a little pretentious, I guess, but that's essentially it. Right, so I'm just going to reset this back to normal. That's black gamma. Knee is at the top of your curves, if you think of curves. S-Log3 is actually pretty linear, even though it's compressed. So it's a compressed gamma, which means it's got compression throughout the range, but it's fairly linear, as in the curve, if you could call it a curve, is fairly straight. So with a knee, the knee is designed to, again, make a point on the IRE scale, and at this point they give you a lot more control. They give you anywhere from 75% IRE up to, I think it's 109, 105%. Yeah, it couldn't be 109. The reason it can't be 109 is because you need room to actually make the curve, to make the adjustment. So if you're recording in S-Log2, which it ends its recording around 104%, or if you're working in, say, a standard gamma, which goes up to 109, 105 onwards is where you can make a correction. With S-Log3, it doesn't record anything above 93%. So if you made a point at 92.5, it would make any change at all. If you're overexposing the camera, you need to consider the fact that the majority of your recording is up here, is right at the top. So we're overexposing by 3 stops. So in order to make a more dramatic change, just for this purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to lower the point on the IRE scale to 75%, make a point, and then now with the slope. It's the same as shifting the black gamma. Now you are shifting the knee or that point on the curve up and down. So up +5 and down -5. Now to sort of really see where this is making a difference, look at the X-Rite logo bottom left, the little person's head, which is on the side. On its side. So if you look at 0, I would say this is what it's supposed to look like, and you see when you push it up, see how it makes it bright white, and how it can pull it down. I mean, here it's looking a little grey, but you might have a reason for it to be like that. You might like it that way or whatever. It's a preference to a degree. The knee is really the whole point of the knee is to try and give the illusion of higher dynamic range when you're working with compressed gammas, not compressed gammas, so like linear gammas like Rec 709. You make a point and you compress that highlight range, give it a shoulder as such, and it starts to compress highlights above that point. I don't really like it, if I'm honest. I like to work within the recording range, or use a filter to tone down upper highlights and stuff like that. But yeah, that's essentially another way you can approach a contrast adjustment in S-Log3. So you could make the whites pop a little bit and make the blacks a little more crushed with these two controls alone. If you don't want the knee to come in at any point, set it to manual and then go above the recording range of S-Log. So S-Log3, anything above here, it's not going to come into control. And if for S-Log2 you want to come up to here, then it's not going to affect the recording at all. And yeah, leave the slope at 0. Okay, so that's that. Saturation makes no adjustment whatsoever to the colour gamut. It does in other profiles, doesn't in S-Log2 or 3. Colour phase, same thing, makes no change to the colour gamut, which is what you're affecting here. And to explain the colour gamut, this is not a white balance selection. This is a Kelvin. This is a colour gamut based around a temperature, a Kelvin range. So you've got 3200 Kelvin, 4300 and 5500, and I do understand where people are coming from, where they say there's not enough options. I get where they're coming from, but to make it quite clear, you have a colour gamut built for mixed colour temperatures. You have 3200, which is pretty much every single professional tungsten fixture out there is 3200 Kelvin. I mean, you've got some tungsten fixtures that can be dimmed up and down, like dado light, for example, which increases, decreases your color temperature. And of course, 5500 is pretty much where daylight sits. Now the thing is, I understand where people are coming from when they say, that's ridiculous. Daylight doesn't always sit here, and tungsten doesn't sit here when it's bounced off of this, and this, that, and the other. And I get where you're coming from. So this is the whole point of this mini tutorial. So I'm going to set it to 3200 Kelvin, and the reason I've used my color filter today was to try and give an example. So to make it clear, the camera is set up with a Tiffin 85 colour filter and a Schneider Black Frost. I know I've mentioned this already. The colour correction filter is made for film. It's designed to colour correct tungsten film to daylight. It's like taking a tungsten light and converting it to daylight, but the other way around. See, on a tungsten fixture you would put a blue gel. On tungsten film you'd actually put a warm filter. And the way the warm filter works is it filters out more of the blue spectrum and lets most of the cooler end of the spectrum pass through, which is where tungsten light sits around. And the great thing about that is when you're looking at the sky and you've got the blue spectrum bouncing off of the atmosphere and clouds and this, that, and the other, and creating a sort of blanket of blue spectrum, the colour filters end up becoming selective ND in a way. They've got like a 2/3 of a stop light loss, but at 2/3 of a stop, about 80% of that is going to affect the blue spectrum. 20% of that is going to affect tungsten. Why would you use a colour filter inside under tungsten lights? Well, good question. If you've got a practical element in the set like a TV or a computer monitor that is outputting 5500 Kelvin, the filter will correct the TV and it will correct the computer screen, and at the same time it would warm up the lights ever so slightly. This allows you to cool the lights down just a tiny bit, so you don't have to gel all of your lights to 5500 Kelvin, which reduces their power significantly, which means more lights, which means a hotter set. You can now color balance the whole set. Then you can apply like a quarter CTB to your tungsten fixtures, and you've managed to balance out the scene without losing much light, which your actors will appreciate. So that's the reason why I use it on a interior, or why I've started using it on an interior. Okay, but as you can see, I've got like a yellow cast to my image. So okay, so now I'm going to move on to white balance shift. You've got two controls here. I forgot what LB means, but the way I see it is you've got the LB color correction, which is a single slider, and I find it's the quickest way, and then you've got red and blue gain. So red and blue gain, I think you've got more control because you can affect two parameters. So with red, we can push red channel up, or we can pull the red channel down, which obviously then distorts towards bluey green, because those two channels are now dominating the red channel. So in this instance I'm going to pull some of the red out, which I think has made it a little greeny blue. So I'm going to get the blue gain. Let's have a look here. I'm going to push a bit of blue into the spectrum. Into the gamut. That's probably brought the green down. If you think of your RGB parade, and that for me, I mean, this is just eyeballed. I mean, if you're using a vector scope, you'd probably turn the X-Rite chart on its side. You'd look at the values on the top, or really anywhere really. Just try and isolate part of the chart. Check your vector scope and see how that's moving things around. Try and get the lines to be pointing towards their targets. So that's R&B gain. If we switch the filter type over to LBCC, it resets the image, mainly because these now no longer affect the image whatsoever. So we go to LB, color temp, which I think is why, you know, this is why it's quicker. It's a little bit more intuitive. And I think if we pull it down, you cool the image down, but it makes a it makes a nice change. And for me, that would be balanced, balanced enough anyway to hand the recording off. I'd be pretty happy with that. And at the same time, if you wanted to warm up what you're looking at, you know, you go up. And this is really key because basically you pick your color gamut. Let's see if we go back. Sorry, I don't know why I did that. You pick your color gamut based on the lighting fixtures, or daylight, basically. You know, so if you're using mixed sources, if you are mixing sources, then 4300 Kelvin is a nice place to be. But you know, if you're working inside 3200 Kelvin, pick 3200K. You know, and you know, match the camera to the light source, and then from then onwards, apply the gel or the filter to the light or the camera, and then from there make an evaluation of that image and revise it in the camera. Even if you're shooting, if you're output into an external recorder, and you are going to be grading in post and all that kind of stuff, all you're really doing is just saving yourself a small hassle. You're training your eye to light and to color and what have you, and yeah, you're just improving your rushes. So I mean, I know a lot of people shoot and edit and color correct themselves. I get that, but on bigger projects, this is what filmmaking is all about. Filmmaking is about working not as a filmmaker. You're not the person. You're not the individual responsible for everything. Filmmaking is about working collaboratively. I can't say that word, which is a bit of a shame. But working in collaboration with other professionals and artists, and you want to do your job as best as you can before you hand it off. And what you're trying to capture in camera is as neutral as possible. I mean, you might want to apply a creative grade to it as well, and you use a creative LUT and even burn that in with a different recorder or whatever. That's all great, but I like getting the camera as neutral as possible and using the LUT for creative on-set monitoring, so that the negative I'm handing over to the colorist is neutral. He knows what he's getting. He knows white's white, black's black, grey's grey, and skin tone looks right. That person looks right, you know. And then from there onwards, they can then apply their creative grade, you know. And this works whether this is the right approach for me anyway. If you're shooting HDR or if you're shooting to Rec 709. HDR is round the corner, and obviously HDR, you can still overexpose HDR with the FS5. You've got a 14 stop camera. The HDR spec is 12 stops UHD 10-bit. You know, so if you're outputting 4K RAW from this camera, you can get that exact spec over to the colorist. But if you're working towards Rec 709, you want to be monitoring a Rec 709 LUT. And you want to be nailing your settings really as best as you can. So yeah, so don't think of this as white balance. Think of this as what fixtures do I have in my set, or are we shooting outside, or are we shooting towards a sunset or a sunrise, or are we using mixed lighting, and use that. It's literally the first step. And here we're shooting 3200 Kelvin. I then dipped into white balance shift because I'm using a color filter, and it's shifting the tones a little bit, and I'll be pretty happy. The other thing that you have inside of white balance shift, by the way, is color correcting magenta or green. So it's always good to go to the extremes as well. You might pick up on something. So we've shifted all the way over to the green, which is not right. And then when we go back to normal, I feel like there's a bit more green in there. And that could be coming from my light source, which is an FMV96 with a tungsten filter. And you know, LEDs do have a little bit more of the green chucking out of them. So if I increase magenta just a tiny bit in camera, I think that's probably made a decent change. I don't know about you, but from where we started to what we've got now, I would say that's a lot more neutral and all the colours are correct. Right, what else have we got? We also have Color correction. Detail, I can't tell, if I'm honest, if detail is changing. Turn it on. All of this information is slightly over my head. Obviously this is vertical horizontal balance. I've seen this in other cameras, other broadcast cameras, but it's essentially it's taking the settings below and then it's shifting the threshold towards vertical or horizontal. I think if we open it up, I really honestly, this is useless. I apologise. Crispening, if you go to Alistair Chapman's website, he's got a good article on crispening. It's a way of playing with noise. Essentially, it's a way of sharpening. I think a way of sharpening or a way of manipulating the image to improve the noise performance of the camera. But essentially, when I'm in S-Log, I just leave this switched off, and it's not because I'm against in-camera sharpening at all. I'm not. The more and more you're heading towards a WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get, and you're handing off. Totally believe in camera sharpening. Right, but anyway, let's move to color correction. This is quite fun. So we've already sort of corrected our image with white balance shift, but now we can be a bit more creative. So you've got two options here. You may see a shift. You've got color revision, which allows you to pick a color and revise it by shifting phase or saturation, or you've got color extract, which selects a color, but you've got to remember that color is a brightness range, so cherry red is burgundy but brighter. That's the way it is. It's not a different color. It's red brighter. Burgundy is red darker. So it's a little hit and miss sometimes. Color extract is also a very, very specific effect, a very, very specific look. But it's it can be cool. I mean, if you've got a particular art installation type project and you're doing like a local live type of thing where you're streaming or you're going out to a big vision mixer and sending off your feed to different monitors around an installation, it could be quite cool. Select the right color and stuff like that. It's something for you to show the client as an approach. I can't think of anything offhand, but if to think of a rival, if it was the Red camera brand, maybe you select red and that's the only light the camera can see. Could be interesting. Let me just show you how this works then. So I'm going to select color extract. In the memory selection, you can select two different colors and then tell the camera what one you want it to show, or what you want it to extract or revise, or you can say please show both colors, or please extract both colors, or please revise both colors. But to keep things simple, I'm going to select one color and then go into the first selection. So memory 1 color. So this is where you select the color for both revision and extract. You can dial it in yourself via phase and phase range and then play with the saturation. Simplest way is one push selection. I'm just going to unlock my tripod. Let's say you're working with a lipstick brand and they want you to, this is their lipstick, I don't know why it would be that one, what a boring colour, but yeah, this is the one they want, and so we're going to select that. Maybe I'll select it again, try and get it. I think that's probably as good as I'm going to get, and then from there, once we get back to the menu, you can play with the saturation. Now when you increase the saturation, it's kind of increasing the saturation of your selection, which then reduces the saturation of everything else. So as I push this up, you'll see colours start to disappear. Now these two colours are very, very close together, so there we go, it's gone. But sometimes you might end up with a colour that ends up like this, and that's no good for everyone. But in this particular case, yeah, one colour pulled out of everything. It can be a cool effect, And then you can then play with the phase. Before the phase range, this is going to affect the selection that you made with your one push selection. But it's another way of you dialing in manually the colour. Kind of like zebras in a way, you're sort of finding a range of colour for the camera to affect. So that's that. If we move over to revision, again, the process is fairly similar. Memory colour, you can dial it in yourself, but one push selection. So now we're going to revise a colour rather than extract it. So let's see what we can do to jazz this particular colour back up. Or maybe we'll select this one. Right, so camera has selected that range. You haven't seen the change yet, of course. Again, these controls are only going to help you isolate that range, so don't adjust them just yet. Come out to memory revision, and now you can play with the phase or the saturation. So let's play with the saturation of that pink. So we can push it up. You know, it could be great for shooting products, or you can tone it right down. Now this is where I was talking about brightness, that colour is brightness, because other colours get affected. Look at the purple. See the way the purple changes ever so slightly. It's because it shares some of the tonality of it, not so much the brightness. This is where you can possibly go into, you don't want to, if you change phase within the revision, it will it will change the phase. What I'm going to need to do is put the saturation back in for you so you can see it. So as you can see, that pink chit is starting to pop. So that's there. Now if we go into phase, this is a bit like changing the hue, so we're sort of shifting it over to more of an orangey red. Now it's definitely become more pinky purple, which is why it's affecting the other purple chit. Not so much from brightness, just from a sort of similarity. They're in the same boat as such. Anyway, if you go back to memory one color, now if you can change your saturation, you can start to limit what other colors get affected. So this would be a way of trying to limit what other colors get affected, but you are going to affect the selection you've made. So there's that. So that's color correction. So I'm going to reset the whole profile, and I'm going to give you a scenario. Okay, so let's come back out. Okay, so you're on set, and this is the camera setup you're using. You're shooting green screen, and you're using particular types of tungsten fixtures, and they need warming up for them to match in the scene, for them to look right. But you know, you're also shooting on green because it's a commercial, typical setup. What do you do? Right. So the first thing, to get some neutrality into the image, the first thing we do is we select the right colour gamut for our lighting fixtures. So we're not working with HMIs in this particular living room with my dog sleeping to the left. We are working with 3200 Kelvin. So we select that. The next step, move over to white balance shift. You know, make a decision whether this is a real simple correction or if you've really got to delve into the red and blue gain and play with that. Always, if you can at this level, be monitoring with a vector scope or an RGB parade on your monitor. You know, it's a really good way of sort of seeing how it affects the image. But anyway, let's move on. So I'm going to go with my favourite, which is a real quick adjustment. I'm just going to cool the image down a little bit. It actually looks really good to me, but I can't help but mess around with my image. I think my LEDs are pumping out a small bit of green. So I'm going to push magenta into the image ever so slightly. Right, now I did mention that we're working on green screen today. So I'm going to make a green screen revision, and I only need to work with one colour. So I'm going to select chroma green, which in this instance is this here. Select it, give the camera a setting, that's it. Select OK. I'm going to make my revision of that green. Let's just move it so you can see. I'm going to push the saturation up. make it pop a little bit more. Because I can't help but tweak with things, I'm going to have a little quick look at the phase, making very little changes to colours around it, and I'm just going to see if I can narrow down my selection, but yeah, no, it starts to affect other colours and it reduces the effect on the colour I've picked, so that's the best I can do. There we go, and that for me is set up. So to go through it, I've selected the correct colour gamut for the lighting fixtures I'm using. I've used a colour chart to help me balance the camera setup that I've got, which is a Tiffin 85 colour correcting filter, a Schneider Black Frost filter at half strength. I'm using a Sigma 18-35 lens. It's it's the GOL Optics lens. It's a rehouse, a PL version. I wanted to shoot 3 stops over. I selected the right zebra range for that, found my correct middle grey target. I'm monitoring via a LUT, I'm recording via the Odyssey 7Q. Once I made my white balance changes, I delved into colour revision because I've got a green screen in the background. I selected the green screen and I pushed that colour chart up. The last thing I might do is delve into the black gamut and the knee if I wanted to make whites pop a little and the blacks crushed a little. But then I would very much be monitoring my image and lighting my image based on a light meter, because that's the way I like working, but I'd be definitely keeping an eye on the screen, because at the end of the day I am shooting for people to watch on a screen, so it makes the most sense. And that's it. So this works for obviously S-Log 2 and 3. It's not something I've found out or nothing like that. It's been in the camera since you've got it. But you do see a lot of people complaining on forums and pages that, you know, there's not enough white balance options with S-Log 3, you know, and it's a misunderstanding of what you've got. You essentially have a film stock in your camera with a certain width to the colour gamut, and it's tuned for 3 colour temperatures, and then once you've got those 3 colour temperatures you can evaluate the white balance on screen, and you can manually shift that yourself. And as you can see, it took a long time to explain all the different functions, but once we then went through it step by step, from beginning to end, it was all of about 5 minutes. All I had to do was make sure my colour chart was sitting in the lighting that I'm going to be shooting under, and that's it. You know, you could probably build global settings for shooting in daylight. Daylight's pretty much the same no matter what part of the world you're on. On top of that, I would definitely say shoot this test with a person's face in the shot, and also just to put in my own little pet peeve. I really hate people talking about skin tone. It's not agnostic. You're always, whenever you hear skin tone, you're talking about white people, and it's so ignorant. It does annoy me. So please, respect the differences in skin tone out there. And if you do a test like this, get a few people in front of all different backgrounds in front of your camera, because I know this might piss some people off, but when they say things like where do you like your skin tones, where do you like your skin tones, and someone will come in and say, I always like my skin tones around 70%. It's like, what the hell are you talking about? Just to give you a pointer, skin tone on the X-Rite chart in front of you is, so they're two values. It's the brown chit just above the yellow, to the left of the yellow, and it's the pink chit just to the left of the blue, which is next to the green. That's your color. That's your two. That's the only 2 color tones that an X-Rite chart will give you, and from that you can extract some useful information when it comes to brightness ranges. So if I quickly, sorry to go into this, but let's bring it up. So if I bring up Zebra 1, and we'll change the level. I'm just going to shift this over here, right? So I'm obviously overexposed, so let's find out where in my settings dark skin came to. So dark skin, the dark skin tone chit, it's floating around 58%. So if you ask me where do you like your skin tones, well, you know, as a broad generalization of everyone who's dark skinned, around 58% when I'm overexposing by 3 stops. Where do you like your Caucasian skin tone? Well, let's have a look. Let's push this up. There we go. Around about 72%. Now, understand what we've just done. We found the dark skin tone chit at 58% IRE. We found the light skin tone chit at 72% IRE. We know based on just on the simple mathematical fact that S-log 2 and 3 within a 0 to 100% recording range, a legal range, divides the stops into 7% increments for 14 stops. So the difference between dark and light skin tone in this one setup that we just did was 14%, wasn't it? 14%. 7% for 65, 58 plus 7 is 65, 65 plus 7 is 72. That's a 2-stop difference between those two people, and that's how it should be. Light skin tone reflects more light, dark skin tone reflects less light. If you make a generalization of where do you like your skin tones, and you pick a particular IRE range and you expose every single person at that range, you are doing an injustice to a lot of people in the world. A lot of people. You're doing an injustice to a white person who's been on holiday. So, yeah, I mean, this is like a little mini rant. Sorry to divert, but when we're talking about colour and exposure and all of this sort of stuff, it's not being clinical. It's not being non-creative. Do find the neutrality in your image, via the in-camera tools, because you've got a lot of tools there. And then when it comes to exposure, treat people how they should be treated. If you've got a light skin tone person in front of you, this is roughly where it's going to be. Dark skin tone, this is roughly where it's going to be. If you want to be agnostic, if you want to avoid analysing that person of where you think you think they should be, by looking at them on the TV screen, use a light meter. Tune your light meter for middle grey, and that light for middle grey, and their skin tone will sort themselves out. They will reflect more or less light naturally, and then hand it over to the grader, and let them play with your image a little bit more. But at least you've stayed true to your colours, you've stayed true to your skin tone, and that because you've understood exposure and you've understood your colour gamut of where you should be. Anyway, I best end this rant and move on. Feel free to leave comments if I've got a few things wrong, or you want to explore extra things. Feel free. Let me know.